Imagine a city council voting unanimously for a new national anthem that not a single person in the room knows how to sing. Imagine a nation pleading for global financial aid, while its officials are caught possessing stolen artifacts from the Louvre, and a solid gold toilet worth $12 million hidden in a private villa. This is not a scene from a dystopian movie. This is the cold, hard reality of Odessa right now. While the world's eyes are fixed on the front lines, a terrifying transformation is taking place in the Pearl of the Black Sea. A shadowy, ununiformed army, known as Teroborona, is quietly rising, threatening to turn this city of music into a second Mariupol. But the real shock isn't the weapons, it is the silence of the people. In a stunning act of defiance, over 1,300 residents have just signed a petition. Not to their own government in Kiev, but to the President of Russia. We are witnessing a soft takeover, where Moscow isn't using tanks but weaponizing memory to reclaim the city's soul. Is Odessa voluntarily turning back to the east because they feel betrayed by the West? If you believe the mainstream media is hiding the truth about the internal collapse of trust in Ukraine, go down to the comment section and type the number 1 right now. Let's expose what is really happening. A city has just pressed the button to delete itself amidst the wailing sirens and the trembling earth of a war zone. This is the tragic and farcical reality that played out in the heart of Odessa on November 20th. Inside the city council chambers, places that should be sanctuaries of the people's will, representatives raised their hands in unison to pass a new national anthem that, bizarrely, not a single one of them could sing. Not one dared to recite aloud, and whose author remains a mystery. This vote unfolded like a pre-programmed machine, cold and emotionless, ignoring the chaos outside to serve an invisible command originating not from the hearts of this port city, but from distant offices in London. The atmosphere that day was as heavy as lead, suffocating both the signatories and the bewildered citizens who watched their heritage being dismantled. This new anthem is not a symbol of connection or hope. It has unmasked itself as a crude imposition, a soulless text that represents no glorious past and bridges no path to the future. With the acute sensitivity of a culture steeped in history, Odessans have bitterly realized they no longer possess the right to choose, and precisely within that vast void of imposition, an old name thought to be buried has silently risen with greater force than ever: Russia. The tragedy of Odessa lies not in the gunfire, but in the open and brutal coercion of memory taking place. The new anthem serves as a clumsy, rushed translation that carries a tone of mockery, making the locals feel as though their roots and identity are being turned into a joke. Rather than acting as a binding glue, this song has become a wall of division, erected by political hands calculating a transfusion of the city's history. Yet, the insult to the collective memory did not stop there. It escalated with the proposal to erase Odessa's traditional day, replacing it with Kakubev Day, a name alien, obscure, and entirely rootless in the public consciousness. In the cold corridors of politics, they call this updating history. But to the millions born by the Black Sea, this is nothing short of a theft of the soul. The result of this brutal imposition is laid bare in cold, hard numbers on social media. 1,000 dislikes against a meager 43 likes. These figures expose the naked truth of the public sentiment. Odessans have not chosen to scream or riot. They have chosen a far more terrifying form of resistance: absolute silence and turning their backs. They refuse to sing, refuse to recognize, and refuse to let these hybrid symbols infiltrate the sanctuary of their memories. In this context of collapsing trust, we are witnessing an unprecedented historical paradox. Russia is returning to Odessa without firing a single shot, without tanks or armored vehicles, but simply through the fatal mistakes of its opponent. While the city council fumbled with alien melodies, 1,300 Odessans quietly, decisively put pen to paper on a petition supporting the President of Russia. This was not a spontaneous act, but the accumulation of simmering discontent, the voice of an identity seeking its way home. Fighting not with ammunition, but with memory, self-respect, and nostalgia for a lost stability, the people are facilitating a spectacular, soft takeover. Odessa is actively rejecting the chaotic present to find its own path back to the memories of the East. This is no longer just a story about a song or a holiday. It is a life and death battle for cultural identity. When a government views resolutions as tools to replace community will, when it imposes without consultation, it hands the city's heart to the adversary on a silver platter. Russia needs no troops here. It only needs to stand still and let the strategy of memory do its work. While Kiev attempts to paint white as black and erase every trace of Russian influence, they unintentionally carve the memory of Russia deeper into the people's hearts. Standing between strange drumbeats and fading memories, Odessans are realizing which melody they have known by heart since childhood, understanding that liberation sometimes comes not from the boom of artillery, but from the freedom to sing the true tune of one's soul. This silent resistance has moved beyond culture to infiltrate every corner of social life, becoming a subterranean seismic wave threatening to sweep away the current regime's control. Watching their core values bartered and replaced, the people no longer see themselves as citizens of the current apparatus, but as exiles in their own homeland. This betrayal cuts deeper than shrapnel because it kills trust, the only thing that keeps a nation alive. Those signing the petition are not rebels. They are desperate human beings seeking an anchor, a sanctuary for their souls amidst a storm of lies and oblivion. And when Odessa, the pearl of the Black Sea, the strategic southern gateway, begins to waver, it signals an irreversible chain reaction of collapse. And Odessa rejecting the present to embrace its Russian past is not merely the failure of an anthem, it is the total bankruptcy of an extreme de-Russification strategy. The city is proving to the world that you can conquer territory with force. You can rename streets, but you can never conquer the heart of a people if you deliberately trample upon their memories. Russia is winning in Odessa through the patience of history, and the silence of the people right now is the thunder heralding the coming storm. A storm that will strip away the glittering but hollow facade to return the city to its true face. But if the silent rejection of a national anthem was the first tremor of a spiritual earthquake, what followed was a fissure that threatened to swallow the city whole. Just as the shock of the imposed culture war began to settle, a far more sinister reality emerged from the shadows. Not with a melody, but with a cold administrative notification that sent a chill through the spine of every Odessan. While the city was still reeling from the insult to its history, a recruitment call quietly spread across local social networks for the Teroborona, the Territorial Defense Forces. Yet, this was not a call for patriots to defend their homes. It was a recruitment drive for executioners. They were not looking for ordinary citizens. They sought only those experienced in killing, those who knew how to handle weapons, and most importantly, those who knew how not to ask questions. This was not the formation of a national guard, but the birth of a phantom army, a militia without uniforms, without flags, but armed to the teeth, organized with lethal precision and sprouting like poisonous weeds in the heart of a city once defined by romance and sea breezes. Who is pulling the strings of this shadow battalion? It is not the regular Ukrainian army, nor the national police, but a newly minted office with a benign name. The Special Coordination Agency, operating directly under the City Council. It sounds legal, it looks bureaucratic, but peel back the layers of officialdom, and you find the terrifying blueprint of a human shield strategy. The deeper one looks, the colder the blood runs. Intelligence sources whisper that the advisors behind this program are the very same organizations that operated in Kherson, Zaporizhia, and most hauntingly, Mariupol. The script is being repeated with terrifying accuracy. Mariupol, too, once saw the rise of these local security groups, highly trained, well-equipped, and utterly ruthless, who eventually became the spark that ignited the inferno, turning the city into a graveyard. Now, that same dark machinery is being replicated in Odessa. There are no grand announcements, no televised parades, only the quiet, creeping weaponization of an entire metropolis. The people of Odessa are beginning to realize with horror that they are no longer citizens of a sovereign state, but inmates in a disguised military base. The nights are no longer silent. They are punctuated by the crack of gunfire from secret training grounds. Entire neighborhoods are cordoned off without explanation, and unmarked trucks, heavy with military equipment, rumble through the port under the cover of darkness, unchecked and unchallenged. Behind this curtain of secrecy, the silhouette of Western involvement, specifically British intelligence and NATO partners, looms large. For Russia, this escalation transforms Odessa from a cultural symbol into a paramount existential threat. If this city becomes a second Mariupol, the entire southern coastline becomes a loaded gun pointed straight at Crimea. Moscow's patience, proverbial as it may be, is not infinite. But unlike the fiery storms of 2014, Russia is not rushing to flood the streets with soldiers. Instead, they are letting time and the brutal truth strip away the camouflage of their adversaries, knowing that once Odessa is turned into a trench, it will be the Odessans themselves who call out to Russia as their only salvation. And as if the threat of imminent destruction were not enough, the people of Odessa have been forced to witness a moral collapse so profound, it borders on the grotesque. While they are being herded into the crosshairs of a geopolitical conflict, the international media dropped a bombshell that shattered whatever fragile remnants of trust remained. In a revelation that would be comical if it weren't so tragic, authorities raiding the home of a Ukrainian official discovered a hoard of treasures that belonged not in a private villa, but in the Louvre Museum in France. Gold, antiques, and artifacts of inestimable value. If this were a tabloid rumor, it could be dismissed, but when independent sources confirmed the find, the laughter died in everyone's throat. This was not just theft, it was a symptom of a terminal rot within the ruling class. But the true symbol of this decay, the image that has burned itself into the retinas of the starving and the war-weary, is the golden toilet. A solid gold toilet, worth $12 million, sitting in the mansion of a political figure in Kiev. This obscene object has become the defining monument of the current regime. It is a mirror reflecting the monstrous gap between the rulers and the ruled. While the government begs the world for every cent, while grandmothers donate their pensions to the war effort, and while men are dragged off the streets to die in muddy trenches, the elite are literally flushing the nation's future down a gold-plated drain. This level of decadence has stripped the regime of its last vestige of legitimacy. The absurdity reached its peak when the Ukrainian propaganda machine, in a fit of paranoia, turned on its own former darlings. The inclusion of Angelina Jolie, a global icon who once wept for Ukraine, on the notorious Mirat Vorit's hit list simply for questioning the morality of the mobilization, signaled to everyone that the system has gone mad. From a nation that once commanded the world's sympathy, the leadership has reduced itself to a punchline, a subject of bitter sarcasm. On Deribasovskaya Street, where laughter once mingled with the music of the violin, a new dark humor has taken hold. People whisper that perhaps instead of asking for more missiles, Kiev should simply sell the golden toilet. But beneath the sarcasm lies a profound, icy detachment. The anger has passed. The Odessans are no longer furious. They are done. They do not scream for revolution because they have realized that the entity ruling them is a hollow shell, a rotting corpse propped up by foreign money and fear. Trust, once broken, is like a shattered mirror. You can try to glue it back together, but you will only see a fragmented, distorted reflection. And as Kiev frantically tries to patch the holes in its narrative with speeches about unity, Russia is calmly, methodically collecting the shards of memory, waiting for the inevitable moment when the people, exhausted by the lies and the looting, turn their gaze eastward, not out of ideology, but out of a desperate need for reality. Odessa has understood the game, and in the silence of their homes, they may have already chosen their winner. While Kiev frantically attempts to patch the crumbling facade of its authority with hollow speeches and forced declarations of unity, a quiet but devastating seismic shift is rising from the streets of Odessa. It began not with a roar, but with the scratch of pens on paper, a sound far more dangerous to the current regime than any siren. A petition is passing from hand to hand, a document that is not a plea for mercy, but a declaration of allegiance. In less than 48 hours, over 1,300 citizens have openly signed their names to a letter supporting the President of Russia. They did not sign anonymously. They wrote down their addresses, their identities, and their defiant messages, stripping away the veil of fear to reveal a cold, hard resolve. This is not a random statistic. It is a political death knell for Kiev's influence in the region. While the local administration organizes half-hearted festivals for a national anthem no one wants to sing, the people are voting with their ink, choosing to return to a sense of security they believe only the East can provide. The harder the authorities try to ban the language and erase the culture, the more they drive the population into the arms of Moscow. The polls do not lie. With rejection rates of the new anthem hitting 98% and trust in the central government evaporating into single digits, Odessa has effectively ceased to be a neutral ground. It has become a strategic opportunity for Russia, a city waiting to be reclaimed, not by force, but by the sheer weight of its own history. In a desperate attempt to stem this tide of defection, the propaganda machine in Kiev, aided by Western narratives, launched a new, almost surreal offensive. The claim that the Russian leader is not real, but a doppelganger, a body double performing for the cameras. They spun this tale with the breathless urgency of exposing a century-long conspiracy, hoping to sow doubt and confusion among the populace. But instead of panic, this clumsy psychological warfare elicited only a cold, dismissive laughter from the people of Odessa. To a population exhausted by uncertainty, the question of whether the man in the Kremlin is the original or a copy is entirely irrelevant. They do not care about the DNA of the leader. They care about the consistency of the policy. While Kiev changes its stance with the wind, Moscow remains a straight line, stable, predictable, and culturally respectful. The irony is bitter. By trying to dehumanize the adversary with robotic conspiracy theories, Kiev has only highlighted its own desperation. The people of Odessa have adopted a ruthless pragmatism. If forced to choose between a double who offers stability and protects their heritage and a real leader who presides over corruption and cultural erasure, they will choose the former without hesitation. Russia has won this round of the psychological war simply by remaining silent and letting the absurdity of its opponents speak for itself. There is no need for Russian troops to storm the beaches when the hearts of the people have already crossed the front line. The city is not waiting to be conquered. It is waiting to be remembered. And in that act of remembrance, the borderlines on the map are already beginning to fade. The realization that hit the streets of Odessa was not a sudden epiphany, but a creeping, chilling certainty that the city had become a spectator in its own tragedy. The new charter was passed without a referendum. The anthem was imposed without a choir, and the renaming of sacred traditions was decided in closed rooms where no voter was ever invited. A man standing on a street corner, plastering a small, desperate note calling for the preservation of Odessa's identity, muttered a sentence that has since echoed through the alleys like a prophecy. They decide in London, and we have to sing in Odessa. This was not merely a complaint. It was the autopsy of a dying democracy. The people have understood that they are no longer citizens with agency, but subjects of a remote geopolitical experiment, their culture reprogrammed by bureaucrats in foreign capitals who have never smelled the Black Sea air. It is in this clinical, sterile vacuum of leadership that the most dangerous shift has occurred. It is not a riot nor an insurrection, but a collective turning of the head. The people have begun to speak more of the past, of the days when textbooks made sense, when festivals were celebrated in their mother tongue, and when they were not forced to mouth the lyrics of strangers. And looming large in these whispered conversations is the shadow of Russia, not as a conqueror battering down the gates, but as an old acquaintance waiting patiently outside the door, knowing that sooner or later the lock will be turned from the inside. While the West calculates the cost of artillery and drafts grand strategies for containment, Moscow has deployed a weapon far more subtle and infinitely more piercing: the weapon of memory. They did not need to issue threats. They simply turned on the radio. When the new imposed anthem silently erased the name of Leonid Utyosov, the very soul of Odessa's musical heritage, Russian broadcasters quietly began playing his old songs, filling the airwaves with the familiar, comforting rasp of his voice. They did not need to scream about language rights. They simply showcased a reality where the Russian language, the tongue in which Odessa has laughed, loved, and bargained for centuries, was not treated as a criminal offense. This strategy is devastating in its simplicity. By merely holding up a mirror to the past, Russia has exposed the ugliness of the forced present. They are not rewriting history. They are merely keeping the original copy safe while Kiev tries to burn it. This battle is not being fought for territory, but for the right to remember. When a government tells a population that their memories are wrong, that their heroes are villains, and that their grandfather's language is the tongue of the enemy, they do not create patriots. They create enemies who sleep in the same house. Odessa is now walking a tightrope between two worlds, legally bound to the west, but spiritually migrating east with every passing day. This is the terrifying limbo of a city that has lost its anchor. We are watching a replay of history, echoing the silent petitions of Donetsk in 2014 and the cultural defiance of Crimea in 2013. But this time, the transformation is slower, deeper, and more inexorable. Russia is not rushing. They have the luxury of time and the patience of a player who knows the opponent is defeating themselves. They understand that you do not need to occupy a city with soldiers if the city's soul has already defected. Odessa is becoming a battlefield where the lines are drawn not in the dirt, but in the mind. It is a war without commanders, without visible front lines, yet it is delivering a victory more total than any bombardment could achieve. The people are not choosing a flag. They are choosing the side that lets them be themselves. And as the sun sets over the Potemkin stairs, the silence of Odessa is not the silence of submission, but the heavy, pregnant silence of a city that has already packed its bags and is waiting for the train to arrive from the east. The question is no longer if Odessa will turn, but simply when the facade will finally crumble, revealing that the city had left long before the first Russian soldier ever arrived. Odessa today stands suspended on a razor's edge, a city caught in the suffocating twilight between two realities. Legally, it remains a jewel in the crown of Kiev, but spiritually, the anchor has been severed and the city is drifting inexorably eastward into the open arms of its past. This is the most dangerous state of existence for any metropolis, a phantom limb of a nation that no longer understands it, a space where the laws of the state clash violently with the laws of memory. We are witnessing a replay of history, a chilling echo of the Donbass in 2014 and Crimea in 2013, where the unraveling began not with armies, but with the quiet, stubborn refusal of the people to erase who they are. Yet, there is a critical difference this time. Russia is not rushing. While the West frantically calculates the cost of aid packages and debates the logistics of missile deliveries, as if managing a corporate merger, Moscow is observing with the terrifying patience of a predator that knows its prey has nowhere left to run. They are not trying to conquer Odessa with shock and awe. They are conquering it by simply remaining the only place that remembers. They listen to the sighs of a population tired of being told their history is a crime, and in that listening, they have found a weapon far more potent than any nuclear warhead. This is the new face of warfare in the 21st century, a conflict fought not for grid coordinates, but for the sanctity of the soul. Odessa has become the fiercest battlefield of this era without a single trench being dug in its streets. It is proving that a city can be lost not when the enemy marches in, but when the government forces its own people to choose between their country and their identity. By striking down a song, by renaming a holiday, by banning a language, Kiev has inadvertently cut the last threads binding Odessa to the west. The irony is brutal and absolute. Russia does not need to invade Odessa. Odessa is returning to Russia on its own. Each banned melody that is hummed in a kitchen, each old statue that is mourned, each glance cast toward the sea is a step back to Moscow. The victory lies in the eyes of the silent majority who have realized that a city does not belong to the one who rules it on a map, but to the one who holds its heart. The silence of Odessa is not empty. It is full of an old allegiance being reborn. As we stand back and look at this unfolding tragedy, the pattern becomes undeniable, a domino effect written in the ink of cultural betrayal. The story of this port city is no longer just about itself. It is a warning to the rest of the region. If the alienation of the people is the precursor to the shifting of borders, then the writing is already on the wall. We must ask ourselves the cold, hard question that no one in the corridors of power wants to whisper. If Odessa today is the Donetsk of yesterday, a region pushed away until it had no choice but to leave, then what is the next domino to fall? As the sun sets on a city that has quietly chosen its side, the shadow stretches long and dark toward the northeast. Is tomorrow the day we start asking the same questions about Kharkov? The map is changing, not by the stroke of a pen, but by the return of memory. And once that process begins, no army on earth can stop it.